before and after school, before dance class. And I learned firsthand from my dad in that experience how business could impact a community. I learned customer service, how to clean the shelves, like fun things and not so fun things. And I saw how my dad's business was more than just a business to sell nails and paint, but also was a kind of a community center for people who in the town would come and drink coffee with him. And I got to witness how my dad treated his suppliers and his employees. And I was so proud of being a small business owner daughter, and I loved business. Fast forward when I was a senior in high school in 2009, of course, the financial crisis had just happened and more big box stores kind of popped up around town. And we slowly saw more and more people go to Walmart or Lowe's on the way home from work for convenience, then instead of coming to the local store in town. And sadly, for a lot of reasons, it went out of business. And at that moment, I hated business. I kind of took a 180. I hated business. I did all this research on corporations and multinationals and just despised it. Over time, though, through studying economic development and social business and traveling and learning more about ways that some businesses were doing things differently to actually be part of the solution rather than the problem, I slowly kind of saw how I could have both of those opinions, the love and the hate, come together in a new way. And certified B Corps is one of the ways that I realized, capitalism is such a big, powerful thing. And I've learned that, I think, in order to really make a shift in a paradigm, you actually have to work within that paradigm and create change within to actually turn it on side its head. So that's a little bit of my journey, how I got here and why I'm so passionate about this topic. And I've committed, my professional life to this to ensure that we are working towards a better way of business and capitalism. So with that, currently I'm doing that at B Lab. I work for the B Lab nonprofit. I work in the office outside of Philadelphia, but we're a global organization. B Lab was founded in 2007, and the whole goal of B Lab is to support people using business as a force for good. And our mission is big. We want to cultivate, mobilize, amplify the collective impact of the community in order to really drive economic system change that benefits all. So while I work for B Lab Global in Pennsylvania, B Lab is very global. So everything I'm going to share with you today is not a US movement. This is a global movement. These are some examples of our what we call global partners. So we have organizations that are doing the work I'll share in South America, UK, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, US, East Africa, Taiwan. Those are our official partners. We're seeing that this type of movement is really taking strides in Hong Kong, China, Japan, India. So this will expand over time, but it truly has turned into a global movement, which is really exciting to see. Now, regardless where in the world the businesses or the individuals working towards B Lab's global vision, they all share this in common. So the vision at B Lab is to create an inclusive, equitable, regenerative economic system for all people and planet. And I think what we found is now more than ever, we're seeing that our current economic system is failing. We've known this, I think, for a while, but even now more than ever, we're seeing the devastating negative impacts that it can have. And I think during the global pandemic, we saw even more so the inequities that it's caused as well in the system. And across the globe, we saw more movements for equity and justice gaining momentum towards this. So I think now more than ever, we, at least at B Lab, feel like we're really seeing this historic momentum for economic systems change around the globe with businesses, thought leaders, and we're getting to this point where we're calling for a reset of our economic system to figure out how we go from extraction to regeneration, from creating profit for the privileged few to actually thinking about how we create value for all. And at B Lab, we have a holistic approach of how we try to meet this lofty vision, which is how you'll see in a second B Corps come into play. But we understand that in order for true change to happen, we have to do more than just change how businesses behave. We have to also look at the norms and cultural expectations of them, and what policies, laws, and legal structures are in place to govern businesses and the markets that they operate in. So B Lab does a lot of stuff. Today, I'm just going to highlight one of the main things that I'm involved in, which is certified B Corps and finding a way to shine a light on the leaders already existing and doing business in a different way. And you'll see now more than ever the credibility that the B Corps have, and to lead in a time like now, we think is more than ever. These are just some snapshots of some of the press across the globe we've seen certified B Corps be featured in or be a part of setting up. So before I go into what actually is a B Corp, I'm going to share a really quick video, 30 seconds, that will start demonstrating that better than I could. So here you go.
We live in information overload. We read labels, we compare prices, we try our best, but sometimes there's a deeper cost beyond what's printed on the price tag. It's hard to know who's making the world a little better or a lot worse, because there's a lot you won't find on a label or a website. Like who's devaluing people and harming the planet in order to turn a quicker profit. We think there's a better way. It starts with a B. Certified B corporations are companies using business as a force for good. B Corps take a rigorous assessment every 3 years to certify their efforts, then publicly share their results so you can see. Choose better. Do better. Feel better. We live.
So that gives you just a snapshot of what certified B Corps are for those who don't know, but at a high level, the B Corp certification, which I'll go into detail, is to business what fair trade is to coffee or organic certification is to milk. So the difference is that it is a company level certification that looks at the entire performance of a company rather than just one element of it. And I'm curious, there's not many of us on this call, so if you want to, put your hand or put it in the chat, if anyone here has heard of the B Corp certification before, just a show of hands, or in the chat if you want to say yes or no. And yeah, a couple of you, great. And it's interesting, I think some of us explore the B Corp certification as a consumer, some of us as employees, some of us as investors. So it's definitely something that I think, depending on your realm, you may have experienced it in a different way. But at a high level, the last 20 years, we've been focused on good products. So thinking of if you go into the supermarket or a store, looking for products with the organic label on it, or the fair trade, or if you're buying a new appliance, Energy Star. And what we're trying to shift towards is thinking about companies that may have good products, but asking ourselves, how do we know for sure that just because they have a good product, that they actually are a good company? Because you can have a good product and not pay your employees well, or be degrading the environment in how you're manufacturing that product. So we're seeing this shift to actually looking at good companies, which does include looking at their products, but includes a lot more. And that's where the certified B Corp comes into play. So currently today, we have over 4,200 certified B Corps. They're in over 80 different countries and 150 industries. Regardless of where they are, how big they are, or what they do, there's that one unifying goal of trying to use their business as a force for good and do it in a way that's different than traditional business. What you see here are just a snapshot of some of the B Corps that you might be familiar with. And you'll see here it's quite broad. So we have things like cheese to clothing to shoes. KeHE is a shipping and distribution company. We have marketing and media companies, beer, ice cream, all kinds of industries that are represented. And we've seen the growth in the B Corp certification really take off over the years. And I can tell you that during the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw the most demand that we ever saw in the certification as more companies realized that they needed to expand their focus on not just profit, but all that realizing considering other stakeholders is good for business, but also really necessary in times of crisis. To underscore that, Some of you may have seen snapshots of some of this in the press if you follow certain topics, but we're seeing more and more conversations happen with some of the largest companies starting to realize they're a little late to the game, but starting to realize that maybe shareholder value, so profit, is no longer everything, that maybe considering worker interest is also something we should be doing. We've also seen that through, like I said, the COVID-19 crisis, that more companies were starting to realize this idea of collective stakeholder and considering things like their employees and the community, and realizing that at times, like we just went through and still go through, that really we're all in this together. If you don't have employees, you don't have a business. So we've seen this shift even in more traditional mainstream spaces of these conversations. And even if you look financially, this is just some information from Morningstar. In 2020, basically it showed that companies that had strong environmental or social or corporate governance principles were actually outperforming financially compared to other traditional offerings. And we have a lot of data at B Lab that shows that certified B Corps and companies that identify as purpose-driven actually had a higher chance of surviving and doing okay during crises like COVID-19, which is really interesting. Furthermore, as consumers and employees, studies show that they care and they want these types of businesses. So 80% of global consumers agree that businesses should be playing a role in addressing some of the issues we see today. And 86% of employees believe it's important that their own employer is responsible for their impact on their society and environment. And I won't go through all these statistics, but the thing is, people agree this is important, but the challenge is, how do you know? How you want to purchase from a company that's good? How do you know? You need a signal. You need some way to differentiate one company over the other. And that is where the certification comes into play, and I think is why the certification exists. So I want to go through what the B Corp certification actually is, because if we're saying that this is a way that we can use this as a tool to identify businesses we may want to purchase from, it's important to know what actually goes into the requirements. So there's three main pillars of the B Corp certification. One is social and environmental performance. So I'll go into detail, but we have them answer a lot of questions related to all of the different stakeholders they engage with. And we verify that, and they have to have a certain score in order to have the performance requirement. Second is accountability, and I think this actually makes the certification very unique. All certified B Corps have to make a legal change to their governing documents that legally gives them the protection, but also the responsibility to consider all stakeholders in their business. And then finally, transparency. So all certified B Corps have to be transparent about where their B impact report and their score is coming from and how they in fact made that 80 bar. So I'll give you a snapshot of what that looks like too. So starting with the performance, this is where I started at B Lab 9 years ago, working directly with companies. And I spent all my time in what's called the B impact assessment. So this is an online tool that we use that companies fill out. It's like a big survey, and I'll walk you through the different parts of it. But at the end of the day, through documentation, through what we call review calls or interviews, and sometimes on-site visits, we verify the information that the company put into that assessment to determine their score. And the bar to be an 80 is 80 points, which sometimes doesn't seem like a lot because I think we're used to thinking it should be out of 100, but the 80 bar is actually really challenging. It's not unusual for companies to take months or even years to get to that. So a lot of times companies actually have to improve and make changes to their processes and policies before they get to the point where they qualify under the performance piece. And to give you a sense, about 50 companies that complete it, on average, the score is about 55. So that just gives you a sense for how challenging the 80 is. And the fact is, roughly, depending on the size of the company, but we have a conversion rate of about 45%, which means 45% of companies who submit or apply for certification actually certify. So it's challenging. The B Impact Assessment is a free tool. If you go to bcorporation.net, You can read more information about it, but B Lab's a nonprofit, so our B Impact Assessment is our free public good. It's a really fantastic impact measurement tool that anyone can use. It's free, it's confidential. It helps you assess your performance. So like I said, it asks you a lot of questions related to the business. And once you fill it out, it also gives you some comparison. So the benefit of it is companies, regardless if you're interested in the certification or not, can fill it out and then compare how they're doing in certain areas compared to other businesses that are like them as far as size and industry. And it also has some really great improvement tools built in as well. So if anyone's engaged in any businesses, if nothing else from this presentation, like this is such a great tool for businesses to explore. And also it can be used for nonprofits too. Within the B Impact Assessment, there's 5 impact areas that we ask companies about. These represent different groups of stakeholders. And again, a stakeholder is just someone that's impacted by the operation of a business. So we have governance, workers, environment, community, and customers. And then within that, I wanted to give you a sense for what types of questions we ask. So we have what we call operational questions. So these are questions about the day-to-day operations of the business. Every business receives these questions. In governance, we ask about their board of directors, their mission, their engagement, transparency of financials, and key performance indicators. In workers, we're looking at how employees are paid, the benefits they get, training, job flexibility. Under community, we look at diversity within their workforce, within their supply chain, civic engagement, so any type of donations or collaboration work they're involved in their community. Environment's a little bit more straightforward. So we're looking at their inputs and their outputs, regardless of the size of the company. Every business has an environmental footprint. So we help them think about what that is for their office, land, or plant that they operate. Inputs, so what office materials are you using? And outputs, what are your greenhouse gas emissions, your waste, your energy usage? And then for companies that are relevant, we also ask questions around their suppliers, distribution, and transportation. And then of course, we also ask about customers, mostly around data security and the kind of customer support they're offering. And then we also have what's called impact business models. So in addition to those day-to-day questions that we ask companies and assess them on, we also ask if they have any impact business models. And that's a unique business model to them. They usually only have 1 or 2. And these are things that they've designed their business to do to create impact. Some of these impact business models refer to how they operate, and some refer to the product or services they sell. So I'll give you 2 examples. Under workers, we have something called workforce development. These are for companies who have designed their businesses to be able to employ people who are chronically underemployed and actually build a system so that they're creating jobs for people who otherwise would struggle to have them. One example, if you're local to Bethlehem, they're not certified B Corp, but in my head, I'm always like, what impact business model does this business have? Biddy and Bo's coffee shop, if you are familiar with that, they employ people with mental disabilities, and they, in my opinion, would fit into that workforce development. They're creating impact by who they're hiring. And then the other example, they're a little bit more straightforward in environment and customers, is we look at the business's product and services and see if that product or service is having any impact. So in environment, you might have a company selling solar panels or a company that's selling a product made of recycled material. And under customers, you might have a product that is increasing health and wellness, or one that's maybe benefiting underserved enterprises and supporting them in some way. So all of this is reviewed, and then a score is determined, and that's how we gauge their performance. There's a lot more steps, but that's at the high level what we're looking at. Now, if we look to the legal aspect, the adopting a stakeholder governance, as I said, a key pillar of the certification is ensuring that they adopt a legal structure for their stakeholder governance. Some of you may know this, but at least in the US, if you are a corporation, by law, you have to maximize profit. That is why you exist. So if you are a corporation and say you're public or you have shareholders, technically they could sue you if you have two decisions in front of you and you choose the one that potentially could decrease your profit. So for example, say you're choosing new suppliers. One supplier, you know, they pay a fair wage to their employees, they're good working conditions, and maybe they're 3% more than supplier B that you know is operating without following working laws and paying maybe not a living wage. If you decided to go with the supplier A that is 3% more, technically you could be sued by your shareholders because you're choosing an option that costs more for the company and therefore is not maximizing profit. So part of the B Corp certification is actually having businesses adopt what's called benefit corporation status, and or depending where they operate, making a change to their governing documents. And this legal change that they make actually protects them to make decisions considering all stakeholders. So it changes and puts a level playing field. So now they have to consider shareholders equally as they consider their suppliers and the community and the environment and their employees. So that's really key. So as businesses grow, they're protected and are able to maintain that mission over time. So that's a really key part of the certification. That does look differently depending what country you're in, what state you're in, and if you're an LLC versus a corporation, but there's a legal pathway for most companies to be able to do that. And then I just have a few more slides here. The third pillar is transparency. So at any point, anyone here could go to bcorporation.net, and there's something called the B Corp directory. This allows you to search for any certified B Corp. You can do this by industry, by location. You can also search in a name if you know of one. And every certified B Corp has what's called a B Impact report. This will show general information about the company, but also will publicly show what their score was, their verified score on the B Impact assessment, and show you in what impact areas they scored. So how that score kind of adds up. And you can't really see this here, but if you clicked into each of these impact areas, you can see even more specific information on subcategories within governance, within workers. So it helps you understand where they're doing well, maybe where they have room to grow, but how that score came to be. So bringing this a little bit closer to home, like I showed you a picture of some general B Corps that you may have heard of. So thinking of us that are local to Bethlehem, one that this may look familiar, FIG. This is a magazine that comes out quarterly. So FIG is a B Corp. They're located in Lancaster and Bethlehem. They are a brand design and marketing studio. So that's one example. A little bit farther in Allentown, we have NEIF, which is the National Energy Improvement Fund. They're a certified B Corp, and they provide financial programs for energy efficient projects and improvements for homes or businesses. And then a little bit farther in Souderton, Pennsylvania, we have One Village Coffee. That's great, Matt, you know them. They're a coffee roaster. They're I don't even drink coffee, but they have great practices. My husband buys their coffee, so I wanted to highlight them. And that just gives you like a little bit of a scope too of the types of B Corps that we have. Now, this, as Matt said in the beginning, this talk today is a collaboration between the Bethlehem Library and the Bethlehem Food Co-op. So I wanted to highlight that there are some co-op or co-op related B Corps as well. So just some examples here. Snow Isle Food Co-op is a food cooperative in Everett, Washington. And we also have the National Co-op Grocers, which provides business services to co-op retail food. And they're based in St. Paul, Minnesota. I'll also say I highlighted some food co-ops. We have quite a lot of producer cooperatives, farmer cooperatives as well. I have a couple examples here, employee owned. And within a co-op grocery store, for those who have been in one, a lot of times the focus is local, but then when you can't have local focusing on products that are sustainable, B Corp-like products. So on the right-hand side here are just some examples of companies that I've seen in other co-ops. King Arthur Flour, which you can also get that in most grocery stores. They're an employee-owned baking company for flour. New Chapter, they're based in Vermont. They sell vitamins and herbal supplements. Jenny's Ice Cream, which I love. A little bit expensive, but so good. They're based out of Columbus, Ohio. And then Cabot Creamery, which is a cooperative that's owned by the farmers and create cheese and dairy products, and they're located in Vermont. So just to give you a sense that a lot of certified B Corps could potentially be found maybe within our future food co-op once we are able to open doors next year. I'm going to pause there. I just have two more slides after this, but I'm curious if there's other B Corps anyone on the call wants to highlight or has come across, or for those maybe who've seen that B Corp logo, if you want to call out. I know Matt's saying in the chat he's familiar with One Village Coffee, which is great. Anyone else? You can put it in the chat, you don't have, or you can just shout it out. No pressure either.
I bought
Yes.
some new peanut butter, Crazy Richards, and noticed it was on there. And I also bought new slippers, but I don't remember the name of the company, but it wasn't Bombas.
So I was gonna say, is it Bombas?
Yeah.
Great.
And then Joe's had a question, are there any BIPOC owned B Corp that you're aware of?
Yeah, quite a lot, Joe. So of course, I'm not going to remember all the names right now, but definitely there's actually a coffee company that sold in Target recently, and we have their coffee over there, but I'm blanking on the name. I think it might be called Rebel, but we have quite a lot. And I will say that the last 2 years, you know, B Lab, we have a whole JEDI, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion department. And part of that is looking at our own internal practices, but a lot of our global partners, as you saw in that picture, have JEDI focused kind of business development efforts to try to support businesses that are Black, Indigenous, people of color owned. So we definitely have quite a lot. I can follow up with some examples because of course I'm not, besides the Rebel Coffee, thinking of a ton right now, but that we definitely do. Great. Well, let me share our last few slides and we can open up if there's any questions or additional comments people have. But at the end of the day, what does this all mean? Kind of what are some takeaways for us? A mixture of consumers, employees, maybe investors if we have a retirement fund. So the first thing is a reminder that all of us buy things at some point in time, and we truly can vote with our dollars. And I think we forget that sometimes, even if it's a small amount. So remember that anytime you're purchasing from a business, you are supporting something. And I think the question we want to ask is, what are we supporting and what do we want to support? So that's one thing to keep in mind, and also to remember that you do make a difference when it comes to that. The second is, I know this presentation was all about certified B Corps, but in my opinion, like I try to say, rule one, buy local when you can, and when you can't, buy from purpose-driven businesses. And the certified B Corp is hopefully one signal for you to know who that business is. And again, whether it's a service company or it's a little bit easier for product companies because you can look at the logo, but you can use that directory to figure out who those businesses are. And then finally, for those of us that work for an employee, we should also be encouraging them to think about what I call their impact journey. So regardless of the company, I think this is a topic that's quite relevant, not only because we need to shift and rethink how we operate and capitalism and our economic system, but also it is good for business. Studies have shown that. So in my opinion, businesses that don't start considering things other than shareholder value are probably going to get left behind eventually. So it's important that we can have these conversations wherever you are. And I'm going to end with another short just 30-second video to remind us of this, and then I'll pass it to Carol for one quick announcement before we open it up for questions.
This little B is a big deal because where you spend your time and money and where you don't makes a real difference. The more you know, the easier it is to choose wisely and breathe a sigh of relief. Use the B as a tool to help make better choices for you and your family. Use it as a map to navigate a world where transparency is hard to find. Use it as a vote to invest in a healthier planet, better jobs, and a kinder world. Choose better, do better, feel better.
Great. So with that, and Anne, I see your comment and I know that, so great to have a former employee of a B Corp here if we have questions.